Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to begin the first U.S. Korea ESG Forum. We are pleased to host this hybrid event with online and offline audience. First, I would like to introduce Chairman and CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea, Mr. James Kim. Please give him a warm round of applause.
안녕하세요. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I'm really excited about AMCHAM's very first U.S. Korea ESG Forum. Thank you so much for attending today's session today. I think that today's session could really be a game changer for everybody's future. I want to first of all thank Mr. Kwon Tae-shin, the Vice Chairman and CEO of FKI, for helping us co-host this event. We all believe that ESG is relevant to all businesses, both here in Korea, the U.S., and to the rest of the world. I also want to take this time to thank some very special guests we have. His Excellency Kim Sung-ju of the National Assembly, our dear friends from the U.S. Embassy, our Charge d'Affaires, Robert Rapson, Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs, Greg Briscoe, Economic Counselor, Michael Kavanaugh. These people from the U.S. Embassy are really important to enhancing U.S.-Korea relationships, so I'm very thankful for their participation here today. Doing business responsibly and socially conscious way is really important than ever before. ESG has emerged as a key foundation to measure the broader impacts as the way we conduct our daily businesses. So I think it's really material. There is now a big focus on improving companies' practices via environment, social, and governance. And I'm talking about topics such as climate change, a topic that my friends from New York Times always talks about, diversity, inclusion, ethics, and compliance, and obviously a lot more. ESG is not the right thing to do, but it's also a smart thing to do for all businesses. To support and encourage our member companies to explore the various strategies in this exciting transformation, AMCHAM recently launched the ESG Committee. This is how seriously we are taking ESG. And we're very lucky that this committee is led by three of our most prominent governors. The three leaders are CEOs of their respective companies. First is Jim Fostasiak from 3M. We have Andrew Rue from Dow. And we also have Balaka Niazi from P&G. So obviously three tremendous leaders, three tremendous companies leading AMCHAM's ESG transformation. And I think that with their leadership, I'm so confident that the ESG committee will be the bridge to the powerful partnerships between the U.S. and Korean business communities. Today, obviously because of COVID, we're limited to the physical audience, but we have around 200 people in the audience, both in person and online. We also have many prominent speakers with us today from PwC, Morgan Stanley, our good friend from Nada Holdings as well. But I'm also very pleased to announce that my dear friend Stephen Dunbar Johnson from New York Times is here with us today. He came here all the way from the UK. Of course, he has other activities here in Korea, but he's here to help with a nice discussion via a panel. And I'm sure we can take a lot of insights from his experience as well. I'm very confident that today's seminar is going to be very helpful for all of us. So I want to thank you very much for attending this conference today. This is going to be our first of many ESG-related seminars. So thank you very much. I hope that you can learn a lot today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kim. Now we are honored to have with us Vice Chairman and CEO of the Federation of Korean Industries, Mr. Kwon Tae-shin. Please help me welcome him to the stage.
전국경제인연합회 상근 부회장 권태신입니다. 바쁘신 가운데 오늘 포럼에 많은 분들이 참석해 주셨습니다. 감사드립니다. 특히 이 국회에서 ESG 포럼 대표를 맡고 계시는 김성주 의원님 감사합니다. 또 오늘 영상 축사해 주실 로버트 랩슨 주한미국 대사 대리님께도 감사드립니다. 특히 짧은 방한 기간 중에도 흔쾌히 포럼에 참여해 주신 스티븐 덤버 존슨 뉴욕타임스 인터내셔널 사장님 감사합니다. 또한 글로벌 동향을 생생하게 전해주실 삼일 PwC, 모건 스탠리, 3M, P&G, 다우 코리아 등 토론조와 패널 분들께도 깊은 감사 말씀드립니다. I'll speak English for about 3 minutes and then I go back to Korean. Yesterday and the day before yesterday, FKI, me and my chairman participated B7 summit meeting chaired by London CBI chairman Mr. Karan Bilimoria. And Korea is not a member of G7, but we were invited to have close ties with UK and USA. So Korea, India, Australia, South Africa was invited. And we discussed the issues of ESG, climate change, the reform of WTO, and then the vaccine passport, all those issues. So I'm very happy to tell you the progress. And my special thanks especially goes to James Kim, who used to be my tennis partner. He's excellent, like a professional player. And then he graduated Harvard and UCLA, and then he used to be Korean president of GM and then Microsoft. And I'm very happy we can work together. And my special thanks goes to Stephen Dunbar Jones. He's president of New York Times International. And then this is my second time to see you, but you made a great decision to move your Asian headquarters from Hong Kong to Seoul. So I heard you have 3 headquarters in the world. That is New York, London, and Seoul. Thank you very much. Please give him big applause. And I'm happy to see Madam Ms. Balaka Niazi, who is representative Korea P&G. In 1984, when I was in the Ministry of Finance, I was in charge of promoting foreign direct investment into Korea. That time, I approved the P&G to Korea. So I'm happy to see you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll go back to Korean. Thank you. 지난해부터 한국 경제계에서도 ESG 논의가 거세지고 있습니다. 지난 4월 전경련 설문조사 결과에 따르면 매출 500대 기업 CEO 10명 중 7명은 ESG에 대한 관심도가 높다고 합니다. 실제로 많은 기업들이 ESG 조직 구성, 수준 측정, 기업 간 얼라이언스, 소비자, 협력사, 투자자 관계, 친환경 기술 개발 등에 적극 노력하고 있습니다. 참석자 여러분, ESG는 글로벌 현상입니다. 특히 블랙락 등 글로벌 기관 투자자들이 ESG 투자에 강한 드라이버를 걸고 있습니다. 이에 한국의 많은 기업들이 다양한 글로벌 사례와 논의 동향을 궁금해하는 상황입니다. 한미 ESG 포럼이 그 갈증을 해소해 주길 기대해 봅니다. 앞서 말씀드린 바와 같이 한국의 많은 기업들이 ESG 경영에 노력하고 있습니다만 MSCI 등 글로벌 기관의 우리 기업에 대한 ESG 평가 결과는 기대만큼 높지 않다는 느낌입니다. 일각에서는 우리 기업에 대한 정보가 부족하기 때문이 아니겠느냐는 해석도 제기됩니다. 마침 전경련이 다양한 국내 기업과 기관들로 구성된 KESG 얼라이언스를 발족했고 이를 통해 한국 기업들의 ESG 경영 우수 사례를 발굴 검증하고자 합니다. 발굴된 우수 사례를 MSCI 측에 전달하겠습니다. 보다 많은 정보를 바탕으로 우리 기업들이 노력에 상응하는 등급을 받을 수 있었으면 합니다. 오늘 행사가 한미 양국 기업의 ESG 경영에 조금이나마 도움이 되기를 바랍니다. 오늘은 ESG 경영에 앞서 나가고 있는 미국과 글로벌 트렌드를 들을 만큼 오는 다가오는 2회 때는 많은 한국 기업들이 충족한 사례를 전해드릴 수 있었으면 합니다. 다시 한번 바쁘신 일정 중에 참석해 주신 모든 분들께 감사드리며 개회사를 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your words. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, His Excellency Kim Sung-ju of the National Assembly. National Assemblyman Kim Sung-ju, who was also elected for the 19th National Assembly, is the Executive Secretary for the National Assembly's Health and Welfare Committee, served as the 16th Chairman of the National Pension Service, and is also a co-chair of the National Assembly's ESG Forum. Please give him a big round of applause.
예, 반갑습니다. 국회 ESG 포럼 공동 대표를 맡고 있는 더불어민주당 소속 국회의원 김성주입니다. 먼저 제1회 한미 ESG 포럼을 진심으로 축하드립니다. 이 자리를 마련해 주신 김윤 KESG 얼라이언스 의장님, 제임스 김 암참 회장님, 또 권태신, 우리 정경련 부회장님 감사드립니다. 또 앞으로 기조연설을 해주실 스티븐 넘바 존슨 뉴욕타임스 인터내셔널 사장님 또 감사드립니다. 짐 폴테색 3M 코리아 지사장님, 말라칸 리아지 P&G 코리아 대표님, 앤드류 류 다우 코리아 지사장님과 발표와 토론에 참여해 주신 분들에게도 감사 말씀드립니다. 최근 우리나라에서 ESG가 가장 뜨거운 화두가 되어 있습니다. 재계, 금융권이 앞장서고 있습니다. 정부나 국회도 발빠르게 움직이고 있습니다. 제가 창설을 제안한 국회 ESG 포럼이 국회에 있는 많은 수십 개의 연구회 중에서 불과 짧은 기간 동안에 60여 명이 넘는 국회의원들이 정당을 초월해서 참여할 만큼 아주 관심이 높습니다. 저는 ESG가 우리 사회에서 확고한 트렌드로 자리 잡기 위해서 국회 ESG 포럼을 발의하고 관련된 기업과 연구자들 또 정부하고 제도 개선을 위한 구체적인 방안들을 협의해 나갈 것입니다. 한 가지 우려하는 점이 있습니다. 우리가 그린워싱을 우려하듯이 ESG도 확고한 트렌드가 아니라 또 하나의 유행, 패션처럼 인식되지 않을까라는 우려가 있는 겁니다. 근본적으로 ESG에 대한 얘기는 유엔이 먼저 제기해서 오랫동안 해왔지만 그걸 받아들이는 각 나라와 기업의 강도는 차이가 납니다. 특히 한국은 ESG에 있어서는 절대로 앞선 나라가 아닙니다. 그러나 ESG가 단순한 어쩔 수 없는 압력에 의해서 받아들이는 게 아니라 이게 기후변화 위기를 대응하는 또는 지속 가능한 사회를 만드는 데 있어서 그 누구도 피해서는 안 될 의무로 받아들여야 된다는 것입니다. 최근에 민주당에서도 탄소 중립 특별위원회를 만들었습니다. 과거에 대한민국 정부는 이 기후 변화에 대해서 굉장히 소극적인 태도를 취해왔습니다. 문재인 정부 들어서 이제 대한민국도 그런 국제적인 의무를 소홀히 하지 않아야 된다라고 하는 생각에 2050년 탄소 중립 목표를 내세웠고 오랫동안 탄소 중립을 추구해왔던 여당인 민주당에서도 탄소 중립 특별위원회를 만들었고 저도 금융분과장으로 참여하고 있습니다. 저는 앞서 소개해드렸다시피 얼마 전에 이 직전에 국민연금공단 내셔널 펜션 서비스의 CEO로 활동했습니다. 그때 우리나라 전 세계 세 번째 연기금인 MPS가 아직 ESG에 대한 원칙이 확립되어 있지 않았다는 것을 심각하게 느끼고 유럽과 아메리카 쪽에 연기금 관계자들과 만난 후에 우리도 ESG 방향으로 가야 된다라고 역설했습니다. 최근에 국민연금 내부에서는 탈석탄 투자에 대한 논쟁이 뜨겁게 이루어지고 있습니다. 저도 국회에서 국민연금 후임이죠, 이사장에게 탈석탄 투자를 선언하라고 계속 압박을 했습니다. 그 안건을 다루었는데 우리 기업 측 참가자에서 여전히 반대 의견을 제시해서 지난주에 결론을 내지 못했다고 합니다. 다시 회의를 개최한다면 이 ESG 또는 기후변화 대응이 어느 특정 기업과 나라를 위한 게 아니라 아주 글로벌한 것으로서 결국은 지속가능한 사회, 지속가능한 성장, 지속가능한 기업을 위해서 피할 수 없는 거라는 것을 잘 좀 인식해서 한국도 탈석탄 투자 대열에 동참했으면 하는 바람입니다. 우리 기업들도 이제 과거와 다르게 새로운 인식을 가지고 글로벌 경영 활동을 해야 한다고 생각합니다. 최근에 ESG에 대한 우리 기업들의 높은 관심은 굉장히 고무적인 일입니다. 그러나 대기업들이 비교적 빨리 움직이는 반면에 아직 중소기업들은 그 부분에 대해서는 나무일처럼 받아들이고 있는 것도 현실입니다. 앞으로 이 한미 ESG 포럼이 우리들 기업들에게 ESG에 대한 글로벌 트렌드를 확실하게 또 좀 전해주고 또 확산하는 그런 역할을 해주실 것을 기대합니다. 다시 한번 오늘 포럼에 참석해 주신 여러분들에게 감사 말씀드립니다. 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much for your insightful words. Now we will hear congratulatory remarks from Honorable Robert Rapson, Acting U.S. Ambassador in Korea.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 미국 대사관 대사대리 랍슨입니다. 반갑습니다. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Rob Rapson here, Chargé at the U.S. Embassy. Representative Kim Sung-ju, Samyang Chairman Kim, Jim Kim, members of the American Chamber of Commerce and of the Federation of Korean Industries. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. My only regret is that I can't be with you in person this morning, but I still wanted to offer support and encouragement for this exciting new initiative. I applaud the AMCHAM and the FKI for convening the first ever U.S. Korea ESG Forum, which highlights the important role that American and Korean businesses play in the strong economic partnership between our two countries. As ESG has evolved to become a key strategy for corporate growth, companies in the United States, the Republic of Korea, and all over the world are strengthening their efforts to maintain sustainable management, to build environmental practices, strong social responsibility tenets, and ethical governance initiatives into their corporate policies and everyday operations. Last week, I had the opportunity to meet with the leadership of AMCHAM's ESG committee. Speaking with the three co-chairs, I heard firsthand their vision and the new committee's core objectives. Andrew, Baraka, and Jim, I'd like to congratulate you on your initiative. The U.S. Embassy looks forward to supporting and collaborating with you on good environmental practices and regulation and on improving diversity and inclusion, with a special emphasis on women in the workplace. It makes perfect sense that American and Korean firms are working together on these important issues and reflects that our alliance and economic partnership is based on shared values and on trust. This is also one of the focal points of next week's summit between President Biden and President Moon, which will look for ways to strengthen our ironclad U.S.-South Korea alliance, which for 7 decades has served as the linchpin of peace, security, and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. Climate considerations are at the center of the U.S. foreign policy and national security agenda, and Korea is a key partner in this effort. Climate change Special Envoy John Kerry was just out here last month for consultations, and President Moon was an important contributor to the climate summit on April 22nd, at which President Biden committed to take ambitious action to tackle climate change and set the United States on the path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. This will be an enormous effort which will take a wholesale transformation of the global economy. And the success of that transformation will depend in large part on leadership from the private sector, firms, investors, and innovators. Looking ahead, and especially toward the day when we emerge from the cloud of COVID, we'll continue to work closely with our allies and partners to put the world on a sustainable climate pathway. We look forward to fostering our strong partnership with the Republic of Korea and the AMCHAM in helping Korean and American companies lead the world in this effort with innovative and cutting-edge technologies and best practices to protect our common interests and values and to advance our commercial ties. In closing, thank you again for the hard work you do to contribute to the strong and enduring U.S. Korea relationship. I wish you the very best of success for your ESG initiatives. Thank you for having me here today. 감사합니다.
Now I would like to turn it over to our first presenter, Mr. Stephen Dunbar Johnson, President International of the New York Times. He will be presenting on the New York Times Climate Hub, Ideas with the Power to Change Our Future. Please help me welcome him to the podium.
Good morning. Vice Chairman Kwon Tai-shin, His Excellency Kim Sung-ju, the National Assembly, Robert Rapson, Chargé d'Affaires and Interim U.S. Ambassador, and Gregory Bursko, Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs. It's a great honor to be here. And James, thank you so much for inviting me to come this morning. Thank you so much for all the help you've given us at the New York Times in establishing our operations here. You've been enormously helpful. And actually, a perfect example of how a Chamber of Commerce should work. So I'd like to applaud you for all your help on that. And also like to applaud you on your efforts to establish an ESG committee. We've spoken on many occasions about ESG and the importance of ESG. And I think the establishment of this committee is essential. So you might, I hope you can hear me with my mask, you might imagine that with the world still navigating through a global pandemic, that the businesses would have other concerns rather than environmental, societal, and governmental concerns. After all, these have been seen very much as nice-to-haves, not as must-haves. But as you know, that is not the case. ESGs have become fundamentally important, and you will hear from much smarter people than I this morning as to why. Why the ESG movement is not a fad, but will be sustained and will grow going forward. Why increasingly investors are weighing ESG in their decisions to measure long-term value and business resiliency. Why companies are increasingly seeing the benefits of investing in social and human capital. And this has been accelerated by the pandemic, not decelerated. A loyal and motivated workforce creates value for the enterprise over the long term and reduces turnover. Workforces want to work for organizations that have strong values and are contributors to society. Good governance has never been more important. But overarching all of this is, of course, the welfare of our planet. This is now an understanding, there is now an understanding that if we do not address man-made global warming with urgency, that all of our businesses will be negatively impacted. This is just not a moral thing, it is actually a business fundamental. Governments too, in order to meet their increasingly and necessarily ambitious climate commitments, will need to enshrine those commitments in legislation. That means businesses will need to comply, and those that are not anticipating this will likely be punished by their consumers and by their stakeholders going forward. So what are we doing at the New York Times? Firstly, we are undergoing an extensive independent review of our environmental footprint. It's quite a sophisticated thing to do. I know a lot of other companies are doing this, but we're undergoing this with an external audit. We have always given a heavy priority to our human capital, and that has and is being accelerated and deepened during the pandemic. But foremost, as a global media organization, we see our ultimate responsibility is to report on all elements that go into ESGs, and most critically, on the climate. Now, to illustrate our commitments to this, let me give an example, what we are going to be doing at the COP26 gathering in Glasgow, which I think is going to be the most important COP ever. In fact, I know it will be the most important COP ever this year in Glasgow. So first of all, I just want to talk for a second about our commitment to coverage in this space. Last year, we published close to 4,000 articles referring to climate. I repeat, that's 4,000 articles, over 800 articles specifically on the subject of climate change. And we saw an average of 6 million monthly page views to the climate section in Q4 of last year alone. So there's huge interest in this subject by our readers. In 2015, Dean Baquet, the editor of the New York Times, made a decision that we had to put climate coverage at the center of our newsroom. And so he set up a climate desk and put it in the center of our newsroom. And that climate desk now comprises of 12 journalists. They're illustrated here. And they are charged exclusively with covering the climate story. But that is just the tip of the spear, because increasingly now we are assigning our graphics team and our visual journalist team to climate stories. And also our considerable number of foreign reporters are increasingly being assigned climate stories. This map is this graph is an independent, is a graph of an independent survey by Colorado University, which maps media's coverage of the climate. The green bar here is the New York Times, and you can see since we installed our climate desk that the number of our output on climate is very significantly ahead of our US competitor set. This is a chart that shows how our readers care about climate and sustainability. 84% of our digital readers have told us that they say that, that this is a very important subject for them personally, and 91% have said that they look at how companies are responsible in this area as well. So there's huge interest in this. So COP26, an absolutely pivotal moment for all of us this year in Glasgow in November, because if we do not meet the climate commitment of net zero by 2050, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. So since the Biden administration has come into power, there was already a lot of impetus towards this COP, but that has really accelerated very significantly in the last few months. So what are we doing? And this is really just an example of how important the emphasis we're putting on climate change. So the New York Times is going to have a very significant presence in COP. We're going to be bringing together the world's leading business and political leaders, along with the financial tech community and civil society, for 10 days of programming to discuss how climate solutions can be scaled to meet net zero by 2020. And the emphasis here is on climate solutions, because so often the stories that hit our homepage and our front page of our newspapers tend to be the dystopian stories that we're in a lot of trouble. And we are in trouble. But we're also covering extensively solutions. Solutions in the energy transition, the solutions in the transport transition, in materials, how cities need to change. All of this has been covered in the New York Times. And it is about solutions that we'll be focusing in Glasgow. How do we scale to put the financial commitments, the policy frameworks, and harness technology to achieve and scale solutions across all of these areas. These are the platforms. We're going to be focusing on energy and storage, food and agriculture, materials and innovation, waters and oceans, transport and infrastructure. And across all of these, bringing together the financial community to talk about how we can harness capital, the tech community to engage technology, has to be through technology. We also want to critically give agency to young people in Glasgow. It is, after all, their future, and they're helping us in our programming. And they will be participating on stage with political leaders and business leaders. And also, extraordinarily important is women leadership in the climate challenge. Women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and women leaders have an extraordinarily important role to play in driving change forward. So, just to give you a sense of the leading up to, we're having a lot of coverage in virtual conferences running up to COP, but we're physically going to be taking a space. All of the talks that I've just mentioned are going to be taking place in a building that we're going to be calling the New York Times Climate Hub. It is about a 5-minute walk from, or 10-minute walk from the COP venue, which is SEC and Hydro on this map by the River Clyde in Glasgow. The pink box is where we'll be. This is the building, and this is what we're going to be doing with the building. There's going to be a maze, which you will walk through, which will give you a sense, using New York Times photography, give you a visceral, experiential experience about how urgent the challenge is. But you're also going to walk into areas of hope, which will explain how we can get to net zero in energy, in transport, in food and agriculture, if we harness all the things that I've mentioned, capital, technology, etc. And that's really what I wanted to say about this. I really wanted to give this as an example of how seriously we take this subject. There's no other organization that I know that is going to be as committed to bringing together all the right actors together in Glasgow in November. So lastly, I'll just leave with this by thanking James again. For us at the New York Times, this is a hugely important subject. It matters for us because I think it's going to matter for our investors. It's critically important for our readers. Our employees care about this. We care about what our employees think. It's also important, frankly, for our advertisers who are increasingly telling us that as part of their ESG plans, we are their partner and they want to understand what our commitments are, which is exactly right. This is all about the supply chain. So we all need to be thinking about this. With that, I will end, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar Johnson, for your presentation. Now we will welcome Mr. Stephen Kang, the ESG platform leader from Samil PricewaterhouseCoopers, for the second presentation. He will present on the topic of ESG strategy and transformation. Please welcome him to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen Kang.
I'm sorry.
I'm the
sorry for the
ESG platform leader of Samil, PwC Korea. As mentioned, I will go through the strategy and transformation today. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Federation of Korean Industries and the American Chamber of Commerce to give me the opportunity to speak to you today. Firstly, you might be asking, what is ESG platform? What we have done at PwC is together with PwC Global, we have formed the platform business, ESG platform, to service the companies and businesses in terms of ESG services that is available. On this platform, we have various ESG specialist partners from tax, assurance, audit, reporting, deals, M&A, mergers, acquisitions, and consulting, from strategy to processes. All these partners sit on a platform where they service companies in a totality for ESG purposes. We do not believe that one specialist partner can cover the entire spectrum of ESG. And I lead that platform. I coordinate these partners to ensure that the appropriate services are provided to our clients. Firstly, as mentioned by previous speakers, ESG is on the topic of all boardrooms, all C-suites. How is ESG affecting us? How is ESG affecting our business? How is ESG affecting our people? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? What can we do better? What can we do differently? What type of services are there for ESG? How do we need to report this? CEOs, CFOs, COOs, everyone is talking about ESG. These are some of the numbers, key figures on why ESG is a theme, a focal point. I think everyone knows that already. There's no need for me to delve into this. But the second point there, 40 basis points cost of capital for companies with a high ESG rating as compared to companies with low ESG ratings. That is why there's so many ESG bonds being issued. Lower cost of capital. BlackRock was already mentioned. ESG. To embed ESG into your organization, it's not a one-off thing. You don't hire someone, fix ESG for us, and then it's done and dusted and you forget about it. It's something that needs to be embedded into your organization. Daily routine. Now, you will hear me repeat this throughout my presentation. Integrating in the business. Now, what are companies doing around the world? This is internal data. This is an internal resources data that we've estimated. 11,000 opportunities from July to the beginning of May. So over 10 months, there have been 11,000 opportunities presented to PwC only. PwC. Right? 11,000, over $800 million worth of professional services opportunities. These are what companies are doing. They want to hire advisors to help them with this. Now, this is just PwC. Now, you need to include the other big four, the legal firms, the big strategy houses, BCGs, Accentures, the environmental consultants. Add them all together. What are companies doing around the world? They're not spending $800 million. Are they spending twice that amount? 3 times that amount? What is the market? What is the people? What is the businesses spending around the world? Is over $2 billion, at least. At least. So companies are moving in terms of ESG. They want advice. Industries, financial services, consumer markets, they're all there. You see FS industries, money's always in FS industries. Energy, governments and public services. By region, look at the geography. It's very obvious. Europe, spending, the spend covers over 50% in Europe. Americas, 23%. Majority of that is the US, of course. Asia Pacific, look at Korea, down at the bottom, 1%. Coverage of what companies are doing to spend on ESG. Services. Now, we've broken down these services that the company is spending in terms of the products that they're asking for. Strategy. 33%, over 30% of the spend is in regards to strategy. But the quantity, in terms of number of projects, is about 10%. Quite low, because strategy, it's a bulk. It's a big, large piece of work, and there's a lot of money being spent on strategy. Processes and operation, about 14%. Reporting, ESG reporting, right? Sustainability and climate change reporting, about 23%. Deals, due diligence, and other. It's just roughly the cut of what companies are doing out there. Now, I'll just go through each of those in terms of a case study or what we've done and what companies are doing in a bit more detail for you. 3 prongs approach to ESG. As mentioned, ESG is not something that you just buy, embed, or you have, and then you forget about it. ESG is something that you need to embed into daily routine of your company business. First, ESG strategy. You need to come up with a strategy. What are we going to do with ESG? How are we going to convey to the market what we're doing in terms of ESG? How do we want our employees to see us in terms of ESG? Diversity, climate change, women in business, our corporate governance. How are we going to market this? Where do we want to be in 2030, 2050? We need to come up with a strategy. But the strategy itself, we don't have a separate ESG strategy. And then we have our own business strategy where they go separate ways. No. We're still a company. We're still a business. We're still here to make money. We're still here to give our shareholders value, all stakeholders value. So financial, business strategy, ESG strategy need to go hand in hand. Then we have this strategy. How are we going to implement this strategy? How are we going to make it work? How are we going to get there? Right? How are we going to get there? We're aiming for net zero by 2030. How are we going to get there? How are we going to get there? We need to go through a transformation stage. We need to set processes in place. We need to set targets, milestones. We need to measure that. We need to have key performance indicators in place to make sure people do that, so that we know a year later, 2 years later, that's where we're going to be, so that we can reach net zero by 2030. You don't just say it and forget about it. You don't allow it just to happen, because it won't. You need to do something about it. You need to measure it. You need to make sure you get your people motivated. You need to change your business structure. You need to change supply chain, right? All these things that you need to consider. Transformation. Then, of course, finally, you've done these wonderful things. You're intending to do all these wonderful things. How are you going to convey this to the market? How are you going to make sure your reporting is appropriate? Right? Then there's the reporting lead. Right? How are you going to gather these data? Make sure it's accurate. Make sure it's appropriate. Make sure it's what your stakeholders want to hear, what they want to know. How are you going to make sure that you're going to get good ESG rating? Right? How are you going to make sure you're not telling or providing false information to the market? That's the reporting-led side. So they're the three prongs of ESG. First, strategy. As I mentioned, I think I've already mentioned a lot about strategy already. You have your business strategy, then you have your ESG strategy. You need to go through and identify the key risks and opportunities, develop business case for change, develop key initiatives, roadmaps, and action plans. These are general steps for strategy. And you still need to come up with a strategy for ESG. But as mentioned, it's not something different. It's not something new. Right? I think a lot of the businesses, a lot of CEOs, a lot of C-suites, a lot of board members consider ESG something different. That's ESG, climate change. This is our business. We have our balance sheet, we have our income statement, we have our cash flow. We need to make sure we make money. Right? Go dig a hole over there, make a widget. We need to make money, get it sold, export it, import it. Then there's ESG. Oh, okay, ESG. What are we going to do about ESG? We need to make sure we're environmentally friendly. We need to make sure we have inclusion, diversity. Oh no. We need executive board, external executive board members included. I'll go find a couple. It doesn't work like that. Right? The business that we're doing, how are we going to change that business? And how are we going to align it with our ESG strategy to make sure going forward every day that we're going to incorporate all these ESG themes into our daily routine of our business lives? How are we going to make sure we make this product better that is environmentally friendly? So we need to embed ESG into our daily strategy. A key example, case one, is in regards to Intel. This is exactly what they've done. We have worked with Intel to devise an ESG strategy that links directly into their business strategy. So it incorporates everything they do in their business, the initial strategies that they've had, the initial plans, the ambitions that they already had, and we've tried to align them to the ESG strategy. Responsible, inclusive, sustainable, enable. RISE. A catchphrase to make sure that it's issued out to the market, to make sure our employees, that their employees are on board. And that's how they came up with this strategy. It's a very good example. Next, in regards to process and operation. As I mentioned, net zero. So you come up with a strategy of what you want to do, but you need to have processes in place to make sure you get there. Net zero is one of those, right? We are putting ESG as part of our strategy. We're going to be a very responsible company in terms of our carbon footprint around the world. One of those is net zero. Everyone's going for net zero. Right? Korea, 2030, 2030, net zero. PwC, globally, net zero, 2030. All these companies have declared that they will be net zero sooner or later. But how are you going to get there? You've declared net zero. How are you going to get there? Again, you need to plan for it. You need to assess your business. What are we doing? What is our carbon footprint at the moment? Where can we change our production? How can we change the location of our production, the method of our production, so that we can reach net zero by 2030? What can we mitigate? What do we need to add? So these are the things that we need to, or the companies need to go through. You don't just declare net zero and say you're done and dusted, right? And is 2030 appropriate? Or should it be 2040? Right? This is the type of consulting services that companies need to receive help on or think about. Processes and operation. Again, measurement and KPI, as mentioned. So you've got this strategy in place. You're going to get there. How are you going to do it? You're going to put milestones in place. BASF. BASF is another prime example where we worked with them, with their vision, with their strategy, having their objectives, and then we used the PwC TIM framework, Total Impact Measurement Management. Total Impact Measurement and Management. It's a tool that we have where it assesses in terms of social impacts, human capital, health and safety, environmental impacts, whether you have a positive impact, whether you have a negative impact, how you are impacting those areas in terms of ESG. And that in line where they need to place their emphasis on, that goes into the measurement part, and then obviously the milestones and the KPI part, which is with the report, the Value to Society report by BASF. Another example is in regards to value chain transformation. Again, these are consulting services that companies are receiving from their consultants. Manufacturing, supply management. How are our suppliers? Where are their suppliers? How are they in terms of their carbon footprint? Renewable energy, the energies that we're using. How can we change that to make sure it's more environmentally friendly? Our transportation. All these things in terms of value chain transformation is a type of work that companies are going through. Reporting. Now, this is a framework that you see by CDP, GRI, SASB. It's a reporting framework in terms of 1, financial impact, 2, the key themes of ESG, and 3, the broader the broader ESG. Now, for reporting purposes, there is that traditional financial reporting. Going forward, there will be non-financial reporting measures that that companies will need to consider, right? On how you are performing in terms of ESG, climate change, net zero, diversity. So companies are receiving consulting services in terms of what they should be reporting and how they should be reporting. These are the reporting frameworks that you use. ESG ratings and rankings, there's so many. From one ranking institution, a company could get a AA. From another, they could get a B. There's no consistency because there's no set standard at the moment. The reporting framework, the companies need to understand the issues in terms of ESG. They screen, they want to understand exactly what they're reporting, what they need to disclose. They need to benchmark what other companies are disclosing. What are they disclosing where they're getting good rankings? What are they doing to get good rankings? What are companies with poor rankings doing? What are they not disclosing? Materiality, data gathering, and then verification and design. These are the consulting in terms of reporting that's working. ESG due diligence. We have investment houses, BlackRock, all these other private equity houses. They're making these investments, but they're declaring they're going to put the money where their targets are ESG friendly. So we have ESG framework for the equity houses themselves, and then ESG framework for when they look to acquire their targets. These are services that we're providing to equity houses. Success factors. These are the key success factors that we've seen where companies have done well. One, as mentioned, you need to integrate into your business strategy. Emphasize the importance of ESG by top management. Tone at the top. Prioritize topics. Differentiate the ambitions that you want at different levels. Steer right direction, milestones through KPIs. Integrate into existing processes and cultures. Communicate transparently and trusting. Transformation embeds ESG into organization culture. As I mentioned, you need to embed ESG into your daily routine of how you're doing business every day. ESG is not something that's totally different. You need to embed it. It needs to be embedded into your culture, your strategy, how you do things every day. It's not something new. Going forward, I envisage in a couple of years' time, ESG will be something that's just, we don't even talk about it. It's just embedded in the business. It's just all part of business. It's a daily routine. That's what ESG needs to become. ESG is changing business, and it's something that we need to look forward and we need to focus. Now, I will be at the panel, and then I'll discuss with you further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kong, for your presentation. Now we will have Mr. Seok Jun, Korea strategist of Morgan Stanley, to the podium for the next presentation. He will present on the topic of sustainable investing, ESG going to Main Street. Please welcome him to the stage.
Good morning. I'm the strategist for Morgan Stanley Korea, and it's an honor to be here. And thank you very much to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and also the Federation of Korean Industries for having me here. My mask is on, so you may not be able to hear me, but I'll try to speak as loud as I can. So we all love acronyms, especially in the investment world, and we've heard a lot of acronyms such as TMT, which is technology, media, and telecom. We've also had BRICS, and recently we've had FANG. And now we have ESG, and what we think about ESG is that this will be a core asset allocation theme for the 2020s. So, we've actually, our firm has done a lot on ESG, and we're very much committed to this whole initiative. And especially on research, we've been delving into this topic for many years, heads on. So we're actually, I guess walking or sometimes even running together with our investors on the ESG path. And I think what's kind of notable here is that if you look at the left-hand side chart, the clients that we have basically are actually integrating ESG into mainstream funds and are also making separate sustainability products or doing both. So that's like 80% of our clients. And I think what's more interesting is that if you look at the chart on the right, is that up-and-coming millennial investors are actually, they care more about sustainable investing. And this actually bodes very well for the future of ESG. So why is sustainable investing gaining traction? The most important, of course, is going to be clients. So when you look at the clients of asset managers, they want ESG to be incorporated into the investment process. And there's also other, advantages such as risk management and, of course, generating alpha, which is very important. So if you look at the right-hand side chart, you can see that basically the MSCI social responsibility indices have actually outperformed the country indexes. And even for Korea, we've seen the outperformance of SRI index since 2017. And a lot of that outperformance actually came in from the mid-2020. And this was, of course, largely driven by the COVID-19 element. So SRI indices actually include 25% of the top companies on each sector based on the MSCI ESG ratings. And generally, the differentiation is actually coming from the governance side. So ESG funds AUM, where is it now? It's at $1.7 trillion globally. And in 2019, we're at 1.1 trillion won. So you've seen a remarkable growth of AUM in the ESG side. And inflows still are quite strong. So in the first 3 months of this year, we've seen around $55 billion of incremental growth per month coming into the ESG side. And what's notable, of course, is that equities is actually the kind of the key asset class that's showing growth. And it's been quite dominant. And the incremental growth is stronger with the passive side than the active side. And namely, the growth is coming from ETFs. But on the standpoint of corporate management, really the important area is active funds, because this is where we see more engagement between investors and corporates, and this is going to be a key point that I will also discuss later on. But this is not just about equities. This is a cross-asset story. And I'm sure management here understands, and everyone, all the companies here, is that ESG bonds are being increasingly used, and I think Stephen also mentioned that, and globally and also in Korea. So when you look at on a global standpoint, last year, $550 billion of ESG debt was issued. And this year, in first quarter alone, we've seen $275 billion actually being issued. And this is not just based in Europe, it's actually also in Korea. So if you look at Korea right now, last year, Korean companies issued around 64 trillion won of ESG bonds, which is basically double that of 2019. And 2018, it was only like 1 trillion won. So this is definitely a growth area. And even this year, we're seeing, I think, the first 4 months, around 32 trillion won issuance of ESG bonds by Korean corporates. So, more and more fixed income investors are actually taking on ESG bond positions. And some of the institutions are actually having mandatory holding requirements. So, ESG debt is definitely here to stay. Europe is the leader in terms of ESG investment. And in terms of ESG AUM, Asia right now makes up around 5%. So it's around, $80 billion. But the incremental growth is actually very strong in the Asian side. So we believe that, within the few years, Asia will be a much bigger part of the ESG fund AUM. And we're seeing around $2 to $3 billion inflow per month this year, and it's likely to pick up. And the way we can understand that is, if you look at the chart on the right, it shows the new launches of sustainable funds globally. And the area where we're seeing a lot more fund growth is actually in Asia. So we think that Asia is going to be a key area or key region for ESG investing. There are many strategies that's being employed by investors on ESG or sustainable investing. And the one that's the most widely actually incorporated is ESG incorporation. And there's, of course, impact funds and environmental sector funds. And they're a bit more straightforward. But basically, they're investing in certain sectors, industries. And the focus right now is largely on decarbonization. And the other one is also on renewable energy. So ESG incorporation, which is sometimes called ESG integration, is something that's really the most common. And this is really the most broadest strategy. So what this means is that ESG issues are actually incorporated into making investment decisions and in the investment process itself. So this is often a starting point for the whole ESG journey for investors. So for companies, what this means is that there's going to have to be more data provisions, and there's also going to be more engagement between the companies and also the investors. So the focus until now was just kind of showing where the ESG kind of funds and the sustainable investing market is going. But it's also important to understand what the key ESG thematics are. So our global research team have basically concluded that the key tailwinds on the ESG side would be climate change, sustainable consumption, and inclusive growth. All very important factors here, and the 4 rows below are basically the supporting factors that are needed to actually get the ESG initiatives going, and also for investors to carry out sustainable investing. So, climate change is not the only factor on the environment side. There's also the environmental impact, which is about minimizing the physical impact on the physical environment, and also resource management, which is about using natural resources more efficiently. But investors seem to be more interested in the climate change angle, and this is more kind of aimed at the decarbonization story. And the reason behind this is because, as we all know, Europe is coming up with a Green Deal. The climate policy direction from the Biden administration is quite proactive, and China, Korea, both going to net zero. So there's a lot of incentive to actually go towards the climate change theme. And based on the Paris Agreement, the goal is to move 55 gigatons of CO2 equivalent annual emissions to net zero. And as you can see in the chart on the right, that's kind of showing on kind of a time frame basis. But what's really important here is, like, what are the key technologies that's going to be needed to actually reach that level? So we think that's going to be renewables, EV. We also have hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and also biofuels. So we think that in order to kind of reach that 2-degree global temperature increase, around $50 trillion of investment will be needed in these 5 technologies. So more in the near term would be EV and also probably renewables. In the longer term, it will go to CCS, hydrogen, also biofuels. Korea looks very well positioned in terms of this story, and we all know about the very strong share price that we've seen in some of the EV battery names, and generally I think the opportunities are quite immense here. So green themes have worked out quite well, and we believe that Korea is well positioned there, but we also think Korea is well positioned on hydrogen. Now, I won't go to a lot of depth here, but what I do want to kind of mention here is that when you do look at some of the EV battery names, the share price appreciation actually came when the results were starting to show. So if you look at the revenues, the revenue growth actually started from 2020, and that's when we actually saw the share prices go up. So there is a bit of a need to show what could actually happen and what should happen going forward. Sustainable consumption. I think this is a very interesting theme because this encompasses apparel, food, it goes to packaging, transportation, and even like devices. And so in order to kind of gauge what the consumers are thinking about in terms of environmental issues and also on what their consumption patterns should be, we interviewed 10,000 individuals in 5 countries. And some of the interesting results that we got from the survey are, number one, so regarding clothes purchasing, 83% said they were buying fewer clothes, probably because of COVID-19 also. But 75% of the respondents also said they're buying more expensive clothes that last longer or intend to do so. So certainly a trend that we're seeing in Korea. The second point is that 63% of consumers are buying products with sustainable and also eco-friendly packaging, while 52% are actually buying products that are using more bio-based materials. And the third point is that on average, 86% of consumers believe that they could eat and drink more healthily. But the problem is that 42% of the respondents say that to eat healthily and to drink healthily, it costs too much. So we believe that food is really at a pivotal point in terms of this whole ESG story. And the World Resources Institute, our research team both, we believe that additional 50% food will be needed in 2050. And this is going to be a big pressure on the market itself. So if you look at the right-hand side chart, this kind of shows, the simple message here is that we may not be producing food that efficiently. So if you look at like livestock accounts for 2/3 of the agricultural land, but it only accounts for 18% of the calories. So, I mean, there must be a better way to actually approach this. So we believe that there are 10 key sectors that will be important towards getting to sustainable food consumption. So as you can see in the screen, there's vertical farming, precision AG, organic, and so there's a lot of these sectors that can help out. So in 2030, we believe the revenue potential for these 10 sectors could actually be $1 trillion. To give you a perspective, the pharma industry right now, at that time, will probably be around $1 trillion. So this is a very big market. And K-food, K-cosmetics, and K-consumer companies are certainly, I think, well positioned to also benefit from this kind of trend. So the last 3 slides here, we're going to kind of focus on Korea. And investors are always interested in the policy angle. And policy-wise, as I mentioned, Korea is going to net zero. Not only that, on many fronts, such as the New Deal initiative, there's a lot of projects that's kind of linked to the green side. And so we think the policy is actually quite positive. And National Pension Fund is also, I think, another important participant here, because as Mr. Kim Sung-joo mentioned at the start, sustainable investing, ESG, was just kind of started when he was there. But when you look at the responsible investing right now at the National Pension, it's around 30 trillion won. It's going to continue to grow. And this is kind of important because that influences also the private sector. And we are actually seeing a lot of new ESG ETFs, ESG funds, both on the bond and equity side growing. And so we believe that the private side is where we're going to see a bit more kind of movement going forth. For Korea, I've actually been doing, our teams have been doing a lot of work kind of comparing Korea and Japan in terms of corporate governance. And the reason behind that is because investors are kind of comparing Korea and Japan. So now Korea continues to trade at a discount to developed markets and also emerging markets. And there are several reasons for that. And probably the low ROE is one of the main reasons. But the other reasons are also weaker transparency on the corporate governance side, and also relatively, I guess, inefficient capital management. So investors, when we look at, when you compare to Japan, we've actually been seeing, a lot of kind of improvement there, but we've also seen a lot of improvement on the Korean side. So some of the factors that, we can measure quite easily is actually the balance sheet efficiency. So if you look at the numbers there, cash holdings have declined, and at one point, Korea was one of the markets that had the highest cash holdings as a market cap, but that's coming down. Dividend payout ratio is going up, 27%, still somewhat lower than the Asia average, but still on the rise. But our focus was more on the qualitative side of the governance angle. So we thought that Korea has room to improve actually on the board diversity, investor relations functions, management access, and also ownership structure and business structure realignment. So in the past 3 years, we've actually seen a lot of that happen. We've seen a re-rating of companies through the divestiture of non-core assets. We've also seen kind of realignment of business lines, and all this has actually been quite positive. And this is because the governance has improved for the Korean companies. So what are investors now waiting for? Well, it's going to be capital management. So that really is kind of, I think, the key re-rating factor for Korea. And we believe that Korea is not a high growth market, meaning that dividends become more important. So let me just finish off with this slide here. And this is, I think, a key message that I would like to give to management on ESG communication. Now, you can implement ESG very, very effectively, but if you don't communicate that to investors, well, it doesn't really help out in terms of share price, I guess. So the 3 key pillars to success on ESG communication is, number 1, is that disclosure and also a broad data bank is needed. So companies needs to provide easy access to ESG data points. And in our experience, I think I mentioned this a bit before, but they don't really use the ESG scores and ratings to make investment decisions alone. So there needs to be a lot of data that's consistent and also visible. The second point is that you need to provide a forward-looking narrative. I think this is really the key here, because investors want to understand what the upside is. I mean, how will ESG improve operations, and how will ESG basically improve risk? So there's a lot of things that actually goes into that messaging, and so I think for the narrative itself, this is where I think investors will look for where alpha is. The last point is on C-suite engagement. So ESG communications, IR, has improved a lot for Korean companies. But one area I think there could be more upside is the C-suite engagement. Because this is really more powerful than just the IR teams and ESG teams meeting sometimes. And I think compared to the U.S. companies, Korean companies' C-suites have not been as active. So let me just finish my presentation with a couple of thoughts. One thing is that sustainable investing is not just about how much. It's actually about how value is created. And this message is actually a bit more difficult to deliver. Now, the second is that ESG is a collaborative initiative between the stakeholders. And I think that there should be a lot of room for Korean and U.S. companies to share their ESG experience, and that will actually provide a lot more, I think, progress. So I'll end my presentation here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Seok, for the presentation. Now we will change the setting on the stage for our next segment, the panel discussion. We will be discussing the corporate visions of ESG.
Ready to go? Yes, good. Thank you very much. So I thought those 2 presentations were fascinating, in fact, perfect, because Stephen, you did a really good job of explaining, how this is not a fad. But I thought what was really good is how the process, the vision and the process, and how it's now becoming incredibly important. The process is going to be key going forward. And I think what was also great, June, is sort of kind of the mouth-watering opportunities going forward here. I think what was also striking, though, and certainly this is the impression I've had going around the world, looking at ESG and how it's been evolving over the last few years, is clearly, and this was shown in the presentations, how Europe is ahead of the game in this thing in many respects. I think the United States has really caught fire. It was lagging, but it's really caught fire. And Asia, frankly, is behind. It was striking for me, I hadn't realized that South Korea was at the bottom of that list, which in a way, and I think that this was in June in your presentation, that this came out, is that it's kind of, it's a little weird in that the opportunities here in Korea are very significant in terms of whether it's carbon capture technology, carbon sequestration, but particularly in the hydrogen cell opportunities here, the EV market. South Korea has leading companies in these areas. So I think that we will see, and I think that the Moon administration is demonstrating with your commitments to getting to net zero, that opportunity should be realized. So I want to thank you for those presentations. I thought they were really, really good at setting the scene. But I want to kick off now and ask, I think Jim, who is not present on stage, but is with us virtually from 3M. Jim, I'm going to ask you to open up this panel. You are one of the leaders of the AMCHAM's recently launched ESG committee, along with Procter & Gamble and Dow. Can you tell us, Jim, about your company's vision for ESG and why you've taken on this role? And I hope you can join us on the screen.
Yes, certainly. It is. It's my pleasure. 안녕하세요. My pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I think what I will do, I echo your comments, Stephen. Great presentations so far. So I can talk a little bit about 3M and then really, get into, from my perspective, why I am so much looking forward to continuing to work with Balaka and Andrew, two great leaders, two great companies, and everybody, in the audience as well, on how we can collectively accelerate the impact we can have to create a sustainable future for our countries, our companies, and our world. So maybe let me get into a little bit about 3M. I would say that we are looking at this, our view is consistent with what we've seen today. Maybe a couple of things that I might, point out. This idea of social, we have really an internal view and an external view, both very important as we look at this. So, you've seen a lot of this today. So I think, what I would like to do is maybe provide some color to ESG with some of the specific things that we are doing. So from a 3M perspective, as we look to apply science to create a sustainable future, we think three things. We look at science for circular, which is about materials, different materials, less materials, science for climate, and then science for community. And in those three buckets is really our E and our S. And, we've been using kind of these pillars for a few years before, we had to fit these into our ESG strategy, but it fits very well because this is part of our DNA, absolutely. So I'll get into a couple of examples for each of those. So if we look at science for circular, like I said, it's using less material, say, in our operations and in the products that we produce. So we just came out with some new goals on water use reduction and making sure that we're returning more pure water that comes through our manufacturing operations than went in. Another recent announcement that we had was on plastic material reduction. So we are looking at, have a goal to reduce by 2025 125 million pounds of virgin fossil-based plastic. So that's both in our packaging and in our products. Another way to innovate. So we look at science for circular through our whole supply chain. So it's our suppliers, our own manufacturing operations, and then we look at our end markets. And a really interesting product from my perspective. This was a byproduct of our roofing granules, and what we found is that it can be used as a substitute for concrete or cement in making concrete. And you may or may not know, cement and concrete is one of the worst producers of CO2 emissions. And so what we've discovered is that 1 ton of this material replaces about 0.75 tons of CO2 emissions. So it is things like that that we believe from a science for circular perspective. Then if you look at science for climate, two points that I would make here. Renewable energy use, we have a goal to reduce or increase renewable energy to 50% of our total use by 2025. We're already at over 40%, so we feel good about that goal. But specific to Korea in this point is, we are behind that goal. And one of the challenges we have, and Stephen, I think you just touched on this, is the available renewable energy in Korea is a challenge for us. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for all of us in industry to figure out ways to bump up the availability of renewable energy in Korea. And then from an emission standpoint, so we're looking to bend the curve, and I think you heard this story. So we have a goal to achieve carbon neutral by 2050. We call this, though, our math with a path, and we know how we are going to meet each of these milestones to reduce by 50% by 2030, 80% by 2040, and go to carbon neutral by 2050. So we have this math with the paths with the milestones along the way. And so we really want to bend the curve. So we're not putting it out to 2050 and hoping for that. We've got those milestones along the way. And I think it was Mr. Kang who talked about that being important. And then science for community, and this is really, as I said, both our internal and external look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, both inside the company and outside the company. One of our key focus areas is in STEM education. We are a science company. We believe that we need more scientists in the world, not just to help 3M, but to help all of us achieve these carbon neutral goals and sustainability goals that all companies and all countries are setting up. So we've come out with a specific goal to have 5 million unique STEM learning experiences for underrepresented individuals by the end of 2025. So an aggressive goal, one that we will measure, and we are confident that we will be able to achieve that. I also thought it would be interesting to take a look at what we're doing specific in Korea. And this idea of women in STEM is something that we feel very strongly about. This diversity of thought, this diversity in our workforce is an important component, we believe, for the need to succeed, to continue to innovate. And so, we feel very good about, we just started a 3M Women in STEM scholarship in the last year, and we are embarking on a 3M Women in STEM mentoring program to make sure that we create an environment for women engineers to succeed. And then, the third part, the G part, the governance piece, is also of critical importance. And we are proud to be an 8-time naming of the world's most ethical companies. That's important to us. It is part of our code of conduct. Our playbook is built on being good, ethics and compliance at the core of everything we do, and we're proud of that. But we need to continue to cultivate that. We know that is not something we take lightly or we take for granted. So we continue to drive for that. So that's a quick run through of of how we look at ESG. I think James summed it up before. It's not just an interesting and good thing to do. It's also good for our business, and we believe that as we continue to get better, because we know that, look, this is a journey. We've set some milestones. We believe that we have made some impact. We will continue to make impact. We're humble enough to say, revisit those and say, where were our targets not aggressive enough, and where do we need to kind of up those targets to make sure that we are doing all we can, and also assess where we're falling short. So we believe that it is absolutely fundamental to our business success going forward, as you've heard before, and it's certainly part of our DNA. This leads into, I would say, from my perspective, this committee that helped launch this event today. Our goal is to be a platform for companies to understand ESG, to help share policies, share best practices, and implement an ESG vision for all of us. We all feel strongly about our ability to do that, our passion to share best practices and learn, because for our companies to continue to thrive, we need our countries to thrive. We need all of our supply chains to thrive. We need our communities to be thriving. And we're looking at this as a way to make sure that we can raise the level of all companies in Korea. And I'm very excited to work with Balaka and with Andrew and with the AMCHAM and with all the companies on the line today. So I'll turn it back to you, Stephen.
I thought that was excellent. Can people hear me? Good. Stephen, I think that there was first in class. I don't know if 3M get first in class in the PwC ranking, but I thought that was a very good demonstration of a company in 3M that have clearly integrated this into strategy. This is not something, as you said, where the board sits here or the executive committee says, oh God, this is something we have to do, and they do it reluctantly. This is seems to me that it's part of the fabric of the strategy. It's integrated deeply, and that I love your idea with math with a path, and it seems also that critically that you have core KPIs and you're holding yourself accountable to all of this. All of the things that Stephen said was essential in this. But I want to now turn to Balaka, Procter & Gamble, the second member of the ESG committee at AMCHAM. So Balaka, perhaps you could, I want to talk about COVID-19 a little bit, and more specifically, what kind of challenges or opportunities has the pandemic created for P&G in meeting its ESG goals?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen, and fascinating presentations by the speakers before. On COVID-19, as we all know, it's had a profound impact, and it's still having. And the good thing is that there are many countries which are returning back to normalcy, but there are many countries and people who are still under tremendous distress, economic, social, and health. So as we look at the situation, we have identified, three big priorities for us. One is obviously our employees everywhere, and the employees of the agencies and our distributors and our partners who are working every day. The second one is the consumer. So we want to make sure that, our brands are available and are also talking the right language and are there to help. We have many, many healthcare brands which can be helpful. And the last one is on the community. So we have, over the last 1 year, done a lot of work with the community, and we now call it, Leading with Love, or 2021 Acts of Love. And every team is bringing community closer to them by doing things which make sense for their own community. But the two specific areas where I think, we all can make a big difference, and I want to give examples which are more specific and more closer home. The one is on the equality and inclusion. So as we all know, women are hugely impacted and disproportionately impacted by COVID because they are a part of workforce which is more impacted, like healthcare and retail. Also, working women have bigger challenges. You know, you all would identify with that. They have to do the work, they have to do the housework, sometimes they have to look after the children. So there is tremendous pressure. And, you know, there are many research which says that all the work that we all did to bring women empowerment and representation equal is stepping back and is taking a huge toll. So to address this challenge, you know, we are specifically working on a couple of areas, including important policies, like bringing paternity leave, which is not a legal requirement in many countries, but even in Korea now, we have 8 weeks of paternity and parental leave. Parents of all types, whether adopted children or birth children, can go for that, and that will help. Because we believe sharing the load at home can be an important part in enabling women to still be in the workforce and play a role beyond their household chores. We are also using many brands to talk this and to encourage people to really share the load with women. The second one is on, I think, the sustainability, which is, you know, obviously our supply chains are, you know, challenged, and we need to have the right resilience to work through the supply chain. But specific to Korea, I think we have an advantage in Korea that, you know, many of our consumers and people are extremely e-commerce and digital savvy, so they can buy products at their convenience, you know, unlike many other countries where that infrastructure is challenged. But with that, one big opportunity that we see is the deliveries. You know, I'm giving a very simple example so that we all can relate to it. You know, if you order 2 items or 3 items from one retailer, sometimes you will see 3 boxes in front of your door, right? And that has actually, if you multiply that with almost 70% of people who are today buying in e-commerce, all their household goods, it amounts to a lot of carbon footprint, a lot of packaging material. So we are taking simple step by working with some of our NGO partners and retail partners, in which we are working on automating and making combined deliveries a reality. And, you know, as I think, you know, June was mentioning that, you know, it has to also be valuable for the business. So we see it is less of cost for the companies, it's better experience for the consumer, and it's great for the environment. So I think there are business models like this which are emerging, and we want to make it even bigger so that we can convert the challenge on sustainability to an opportunity. Yeah, I think we can talk more as we go through the panel. Over to you, Stephen.
That was great. Thank you, Balika. And also, this issue of paternity leave, I think, is so important as a lever for gender equality. It seems odd that by giving a benefit to men, you help women, but it's true. And actually, there are case studies in Norway and in Scandinavia generally, where men have a lot of, it's enshrined in law that they can take up to a year off to look after the children, the babies when they arrive. And that has been a significant driver of allowing women to go back to work and to help with this pipeline issue of maternity. And so I applaud P&G for that effort. I'm going to now turn to the third member of the ESG committee, Dow Chemicals. Andrew, Dow has been very vocal in your commitments to achieving carbon neutrality and the circular economy. To achieve these goals, what kind of efforts are you making specifically inside the fence and beyond the fence line, within the company and outside in your supply chain, in order to drive this?
Thank you, Stephen, for the question. As Dow looks at carbon neutrality, we're looking at 3 main initiatives. One is protecting the climate, second is stop the waste, and third is closing the loop. To give you some specific numbers, Dow is committed by 2030 to reduce net carbon emission by 5 million metric tons, and by 2050 to be completely carbon neutral. These are very, very long-term goals, but I think we need to look at this with the probably right perspective. So not all companies are created equal. Dow is into heavy manufacturing, so our carbon usage is bigger than other companies, and maybe some of the FKI members share the same concerns. So for Dow to be net carbon neutral, it's like saying Facebook getting rid of the like button, Google working without the banner, and Coupang getting rid of rocket 배송. So it's a huge commitment for us. We've taken several steps to get there, and I'll share them with you. On stopping the waste initiative, we're working with outside agencies as well as working directly to collect, recycle, or reuse 1 million metric tons of plastic waste by 2030. And on the closing the loop initiative, by 2035, that will be completely reusable or recyclable in all the products that go into the packaging application, which Polaka alluded to a little bit. To get there, first on the protecting the climate piece, we're working with our energy suppliers to use clean and renewable energy. So Dow is currently #1 in the chemical industry using renewable energy. And also Dow is ranking as among the top 15 global companies in clean energy purchases. On stopping the waste, we're working with outside agencies to come up with, to initiate policies that will help us collect and recycle. And on the third, stopping the loop piece, we're working with outside agencies again, such as Ocean Conservancy. So we have a program called Pulling Our Weight, which is basically us going out to various areas. In Korea, we've done activity in Ulangni Beach near Incheon, and also Jincheon near our site where we have a silicone site. And globally, we've done a Pulling Our Weight program in 174 sites in my memory, and it involved close to 18,000 employees, family members, and some of the partners that we use on the logistics side, and also the channel partners that we have in businesses. So we've intentionally carried out some of these activities on weekends, so we can actually involve our family members as well. So this has been a very collective and very worthwhile events for us. On the outside our fence, we're working with Columbia University in establishing a new energy policy, which would be more transparent or more accurate way of measuring carbon emission. We're also working with a UK company to use more of recycled plastic in our feedstock to help reduce plastic waste, obviously. There are many other opportunities, and I think this is one area where a company, a government, consumers, NGOs can all get behind the same theme and try to come up with solutions that will be good for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think one thing, by the way, I forgot to say, and shame on me at the beginning, is that we will try and leave a little bit of time for some questions from you guys. So don't think you're going to be let off. Start preparing your questions now as we go through this. I want to leave a few minutes at the end. And those of you that are online virtually, I don't think we're going to be able to take your questions, but if you have questions, do pop them into the chat box, because the AMCHAM team will make sure that those questions are distributed to the panel, and we will get back to you with answers on those. So for those of you that are online watching this, please do, please contribute your questions, and we will get back to you. And for those of you that are here live, I want some questions before we end today, so start thinking of them. Now, I want to go to you, Stephen. If you wouldn't mind giving us a sense of the Korean opportunity as you see it. I actually have two questions for you. One is about this issue of the Korean transformation and what you think needs to happen. And I also have a question about, and you mentioned it, but you went over it quite quickly, the issue of reporting. Because one of the things that I'm concerned about with ESGs is that there is so fragmented, the reporting. And that there's so different companies reporting in different ways, and it's quite difficult to really, A, for companies to think about what is the right way to hold themselves accountable and report on there, and B, is there going to be some form of consolidation which will help companies like Morgan Stanley and others assess companies? And maybe, June, we'll talk about this a little later with you too. But Stephen, could you, sorry, so Korea first and then the reporting second.
Sure. I think what Korean businesses need to do, I think, as you mentioned before, we may be a little bit behind the curve in terms of adopting ESG by Korean businesses, but I think you'll notice that Koreans tend to be quite skeptical. They like to wait and see, look at it in different angles first, and then I'm sure you notice that once they do latch on, we do it very quickly and very with a lot of force and power. So I'm sure that's probably one of the reasons why Koreans are latching on to ESG quite late, but with a lot of speed at the moment. Now, a lot of companies are evolving and moving into ESG. Now, what I like Korean companies to do, we have very few companies here that we've mentioned already, but the likes of SK, they're very keen on ESG. They've been pushing the agenda for many years now. We'd like the people in charge with governance to take more lead in integrating ESG to their business. I think that's something that's required. I think this was also mentioned by one of the speakers as well, that the governance piece in terms of ESG, the rankings for Korean companies are not as high as we wanted it to be. So from that perspective, if the management and the leaders in charge of governance took the lead on ESG on Korean companies, I think that will pave the way for many companies to follow. Your second point in regards to the ratings and the reporting piece, you're absolutely right, Steve. There is no set standard on what companies need to report in terms of ESG. The accounting framework, the financial reporting framework, it took years for companies, the regulators, to come up with a framework that is consistently used around the world. IFRS. Even now, the US companies use US GAAP, but there is that convergence. But it took years to get that processed. I do not expect the standardization of reporting framework for ESG to take years. It won't. The SASB has been announcing that they will come up with something. The ISB is introduced a new team, task force. The SEC only recently announced that they will be looking at companies' sustainability and ESG reporting more closely. Companies cannot operate in this environment where there is no set standard, bright line to guide them on what they need to report. There will definitely be something released quite soon, is what I believe. Because at the moment, greenwashing. There are certain companies that are disclosing a lot, very good companies, but they're actually getting negative scores because they're disclosing too much. There are certain companies that are not disclosing as much. They may be getting better scores because they're hiding what they're actually doing. As Jun Sok mentioned, companies need to disclose more of what they're doing. I think management need to disclose forward-looking statements on how ESG is affecting their companies going forward to try to reduce that Korea discount and the gap that we have to the Korean economy and the Korean capital market.
Thank you. I thought that's super interesting. So June, actually, just that moves very smoothly to you. I mean, when you, Morgan Stanley, are looking at this environment, how are you assessing? How are you assessing how legitimate the company's actions are? in terms of greenwashing and this issue about the complexity of reporting or the fragmentation of reporting?
Right. So when you look at the reporting, as I mentioned before, it's a very important factor, but also important is the narrative. But on the data, what we also see is that investors aren't actually using ESG scores and ratings directly when they make investment decisions and using the investment processes. So there's a lot of rating agencies out there, a lot of research providers, and there are some main ones, obviously, MSCI, ISS, and the methodologies and also the evaluation method is different. So what that means is that the data that's being provided by the companies becomes that much more important. So if you look at the environmental side and the social side, we kind of look at, I guess the factors in two ways. There are explicit factors and there's implicit factors. Now, explicit factors are ones that, that can be analyzed independently and are generally able to be commensurated. The implicit factors are ones that are more difficult to actually quantify. And a good mix of this data is actually needed for investors to understand how ESG is developing and how that's going to go. So in terms of the data, I mean, even we collect data. We have ESG within our framework when we actually look at the companies. But certainly, I think the data that's being provided is a bit disparate. So I think what's important from here is that for us is that we've actually providing investors, with this ESG. I think we call it the ESG. About indicator of change. And the way we do this is that every industry has different factors that we have to evaluate. So we provide that, and then with that, we also provide this ESG indicator of change, which shows how it's developing. And so I think from going forth, it's going to be, I think, very important that not only that we have a broad database, but it's also going to be important to better understand the implicit and the qualitative factors that we have more engagement with the corporates. So I think it's kind of a two-pronged attack where you have the data, but you also have the engagement that becomes very important.
I really like that idea of the indicator for of change. Is that publicly available? You make that publicly available?
Oh yes, we do have a report on that. So we have it for I think 30 industries. We provide what the explicit and the implicit factors are.
That's really. I'd love to see that. Jim, coming back to you online. 3M, Jim, has made very impressive strides in diversity, as you mentioned in your report. And you have already achieved, I understand, pay equity in the US for women and racial ethnic groups. Jim, could you tell us what are the lessons learned from those diversity efforts and how you are applying them specifically in Korea? I'm looking at the screen, hoping yes, you are. That's great.
Sure, absolutely, and I would point out that you saw that data, Stephen, from our the first diversity, equity, and inclusion report that we published last year, which again in the spirit of transparency and governance, we're trying to be out there sharing with the world what we're doing. Specific to that, I think there's two ways to think about this. There's diversity and there's inclusion. And so the diversity is the metrics that we can measure easily, right? And as with many things in life, I think, what we have found is that by making the commitment, you are, halfway to your achieving your goal, right? And so, we've made commitments in the areas of total workforce representation from a diverse standpoint, diversity in management, and pay equity, as you mentioned, Stephen. And from our perspective, we take this global approach, this global strategy, and then we apply it here. So there are things that I have learned, that we have kind of embedded into our culture. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, like diversity in management. We expect a diverse slate for every opportunity that comes up. So as we are selecting candidates, we work very hard to make sure that we have a diverse slate. I made that commitment to our team in Korea, that any job that I have the ability to hire is going to have a diverse slate. That's how we're taking and applying those metrics or those initiatives into Korea. And I think overall we're making good progress. As we've heard a couple of times in some other areas today, I think we have a longer way to go in Korea to achieve average status in the company, and certainly I want to be better than average, but we need to continue to make strides. Then so I talked about that's the diversity part. To me, as important is the inclusion piece, and we found that as we work so hard on diversity, if you don't really include, if you don't value the perspectives that you're bringing in, it's a lot of work, and you lose the diverse population that you were trying to build because you're not valuing them. And so we have a lot of initiatives, one of which I think is really strong at 3M. We have employee resource networks, our Women's Leadership Forum. So we have 14 chapters in Asia. So each country has a women's leadership forum chapter that is a strong group to make sure that population feels included. And we're building on this idea of men as advocates. And so I'm championing in Korea, in 3M Korea, this idea of men as advocates. So making sure that we are looking, again, to your point, the point that Balaka brought up earlier, sometimes we need to make sure that the men in the audience are understanding what we're trying to do. And they need to change. We need to change to make sure that we have that inclusive culture. And so that's what we're trying to do. And again, to go back to the way you phrase the question, Stephen, these are, I would like to claim that I've created a lot of these ideas here, but these are global strategies, global initiatives, global things that we've learned that we're trying to apply.
That's great. Thank you. And actually, I'm going to make a little plug on that subject with something we want to do here at the New York Times now that Seoul is our Asian headquarters. One of the things we want to do next year, hopefully when COVID is in the rearview mirror, is launch a series of events around women leadership and talk about that. And Balaka, you are the only woman on this panel, so I'm going to formally invite you now to be at our first event and participate there as a woman leader.
Thank you, Stephen.
So actually, Balaka, I mean, P&G are just such a vast company with supply chains deeply rooted all over the world. So could you, I mean, you have also responsibility as such a company to demonstrate ESG and live it. Can you give us a sense of how you're thinking about that, how your leadership is thinking about that, and how you convey it to the community at large?
So, you said it right, that if we have to be credible and talk about ESG, we must role model. And, this comes from a very core philosophy that we have, which is ESG strategy should be built in and not bolted on. And we live by that. So I want to just give you a few examples of how we bring this to life. And, building on what Jim from 3M was talking about, we have a lot of work to do on equality and inclusion in every single country. To take Korea for an example, we believe that working with external stakeholders will help us make more progress, both for us in the company and externally. So we work very closely with the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, and we have a memorandum of understanding with them. In fact, we have been asked to share a lot of our best practices with many government organizations. I and many of my peers from other companies, we exchange ideas, but specifically the 2 or 3 areas that we are leading on the equality and inclusion. One is, as Jim was pointing out, men advocating real change. So we run a program called MARK, Men Advocating Real Change, in which we help men to realize what are their privileges and how they can be not just help or support, but equal partners in progress of women. The second area that we specifically work on is offering flexibility to our women colleagues and building supplier network which are led by women. You know, as you know, P&G is a huge company. We have such a big supplier base. So driving diversity, inclusion, equality in our supplier community and building the entrepreneurs in women for the future with that supplier community can have a huge impact on the community in every single country. The second area where we work very closely is with the NGOs. So in the field of sustainability, there are many NGOs in Korea who are extremely active and who do a lot of work. So we identify certain partners like WWF, the organization which works on zero waste management network. And then we partner with our retailers to come up with programs which can be felt, touched, and seen by our consumers, and they can be a part of it. To give you an example, you know, we have toothbrushes, which, you know, many of us use a manual toothbrush and we throw it away. And some of these can land into the ocean. P&G as a global company has a vision that none of our plastic should ever go to the ocean. So we partnered with our NGOs and our retailers to come up with a loop program in which consumers can bring their toothbrush back to a store and put it in a drop box if they're buying from e-commerce. And we actually recycle that and give it back as a gift to the people. So which means that, you know, we work with all the stakeholders, including the consumer and the community, to actually bring to life our vision of, you know, no plastic going to ocean. And third, and which is probably much more relevant today, is, you know, what we can do with the community. And we have a huge reach. We have so many resources, so many places. So we have come forward in every single country to work with people, health workers, marginalized families on because of COVID. So we've had, you know, donations to the tune of $1.3 million US. Last year in Korea, we are giving out boxes of goods which are essential for people who are marginalized. And in many countries, we have donated huge amount of vaccine. We have $5 million in the vaccine fund as a global company. So we see our role beyond just what we can do for our employees, but what we can do to actually start change in the community that we serve, working with our partners, with our suppliers, with NGOs, and with government.
Walking the walk. That's great, thank you. I'm going to test, Andrew, your diplomatic skills, if I may, just for a second. Corporate and government visions in Korea. I mean, I don't know really what I'm talking about here, but often there's a tension between what the business thinks should be doing and what government is doing. Could you talk a little bit about how you see that in Korea? And are there areas of tensions, and how the business vision and government vision can complement themselves, particularly now that the Moon administration has made its net zero targets very public?
Sure. I'm a bit lacking in diplomatic skills, so perhaps I will sort of follow up on what Jim and Balaka said before I move on to the tough question you gave us. On the social piece and the inclusion, diversity piece, I think most people understand diversity, and I think probably a good deal of people understand inclusion. Dow sort of looked at this and explained the concept, and when we had a huge ERG, Employment Resource Group in the U.S. So diversity is like being invited to a party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So way Dow sees it, we've done the diversity piece, we've done pretty well on the inclusion piece, and next piece that's coming to us, and I think is something Jim mentioned as well, is the equity or the equality piece, which I think is more difficult. I don't know how much Korean companies are thinking about that, but for Dow, it's a very important step, very complicated and difficult step. So the way I look at it, it's being invited to a party, being asked to dance, and then letting you dance to your own music. And everybody dances to different music and being accommodative of that. So That's the piece I think we can share with Korean companies or other member companies as Dow is further looking into this issue. To the question that Stephen has raised, I don't see it really as a tension because this is one of those areas where we're, I think, almost perfectly aligned. The difficulty is, how do you get there? I've lived in Korea for 11 years. As you've seen the intro, I have a legal training also, so I've done a lot of compliance work as well. The legal environment in Korea, me coming from a U.S. legal background, is not easy to adapt to. A lot of times it's either pull or push, and it seems like there's a lack of sort of understanding on what the key item that's being addressed. And on the ESG front, I see more as a nudging exercise, either than pulling or pushing. So I think we all know where the water is, and we just need to get there. And in order to get there, I think we have to all work together. An example that I can give you for Dow is we've worked very recently with Ralph Lauren Polo. As most of you know, polo shirt maker. So dyeing was a huge issue for them because dyeing creates a lot of wastewater. And the amount of water they use for dyeing, I understand, is equal to human consumption on an annual basis. So the amount of water they consume and the amount of water they come out as waste material was a huge issue with them. So we partnered with Polo to come up with a solution to reduce waste. So not only does the government and company, not only do they have to work together, I think we have to bring the entire sort of value chain into the picture. And I think that's a good way to get there. Another thing that came to me as I was listening to the presentation was, I think there was a piece where they said $2 billion worth of investment. So if there's one thing that Korea excels in, I think it's in innovation. And I think there's a lot of innovation work to be done in ESG space. So working with, I think, small, medium-sized enterprises, we can come up with solutions not only is good for people, but also able to create profit as well for the smaller companies. So we're looking for opportunities to do that in Korea as well as other countries. So to go back to the question, I don't see so much as a tension. I think it's a opportunity to cooperate.
So using your going to the water analogy, if I've understood it correctly, the Korean horse is at the water, looking at the water, perhaps sniffing at the water. But Stephen, you said that there's a lot of caution with Korea. But once that caution, there's a sense of confidence around it, they're going to drink the water very heavily. So I don't know whether that's a silly analogy, but I'm going to use it for a second. But could you, just building on what Andrew said, could you talk to us a little bit about that aspect of how you're seeing this transition and if there is a tension between business and government, one. And secondly, could you talk to us a little bit about what to avoid? If you're a CEO of a Korean company getting into ESGs, what are the things you would avoid doing and what would the things you really focus on?
Yeah, as mentioned before, I'm sure Koreans could drink a lot of water, Stephen. I think the Korean government at the moment, they're doing a great job in trying to encourage ESG. There's a lot of movement in Korea, not just in the business world, but in the regulatory space as well. So the Korean government is encouraging the adoption of ESG. There's no doubt about that. They need to do that because I believe the rush into ESG in Korea is mainly a lot of things. Of course, there's the money aspect that Jun-Sok mentioned from Morgan Stanley, but there is that social aspect. The COVID-19, the pandemic has really pushed this. The Me Too movement in Korea has been brewing for years. Black Lives Matter movement that started in the US and spread across the world. The COVID-19, how it closed down the supply chain, the shutdown of all these manufacturing facilities in China, where certain companies couldn't get the resources to continue with the manufacturing. Thriving companies pre-COVID suddenly collapses. New innovative companies suddenly thrive in this COVID environment. I think that has really brought the attention to the fact that unless you change and evolve and innovate with speed, you will not survive. And ESG is one of those themes. This is where we're all headed. This is the world, where the world is headed. And unless we change, unless the Korean government changes, unless the business changes, we're not going to get there. So I think that's one of the main reasons why there is a big push for ESG in Korea, and the government is supporting the companies as much as possible. They're doing that. I think I pretty much answered your second question there as well indirectly in terms of what CEOs are meant to do. They need to change. They need to adopt this very quickly as well.
That's great, Stephen. Thank you. I mean, June, just moving on to that. I mean, it sounds like to me, and I don't want to lead you on this, but from an investment opportunity, it sounds pretty interesting. If you're looking at it from the outside, Korean companies, as we've already said, there's so much talent and infrastructure. It's all here, latent to be done. So, tell us a little bit about how you're looking at it, and how do you monitor, or how should investors monitor the momentum going forward?
A great question. So, Korean companies definitely are well positioned in certain industries, and a lot of it is because that management had the vision to actually enter into those businesses, and that vision actually comes from, I think, strong governance. And strong governance actually also kind of encompasses diversity of the board of directors, diversity of management, diversity of staff. So I think everything really kind of starts at the governance level. But Korean, when you look at corporate Korea right now, certainly I think we're well positioned in areas like EV. We're also well positioned in some areas in I think sustainable consumption. But I think there's other areas where I think efforts are being made, and one of those areas would be hydrogen. I think hydrogen is something that I think no one's really leading this, but Korea seems to be more proactive here, and there are some advantages here because both the government and the corporates are working together to get to that goal. I think that's a very important element. And I think your question about how to monitor, I think I kind of answered that in the previous question, but there's when you look at companies and you're trying to measure them on how they're performing on ESG. On the ENS, as I mentioned, there's explicit and implicit factors that needs to be monitored. And this is something that is important because in order to actually understand that, I think what's actually probably the first stage of it is to understand how ESG is going to improve operations, what the new opportunities could be, and also how you could better manage risks. And so it starts from, again, looking at those explicit and implicit factors. But I think on governance it's a bit different because governance is a lot more universal indices and a lot of quantitative elements that could actually be monitored quite easily. But what we continue to miss, I think, is the qualitative side of it. So I think that's very important because that's, I think, when we're doing a lot of work on Japan and Korea on governance, what we mentioned was that the qualitative side is really where we see a lot of upside. And in the past 2-3 years, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have seen that. And because of that kind of, I guess, momentum, I think Korea is better positioned in this whole kind of story of sustainable investing and also in the ESG. So, I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Steve, I'm going to come to questions in a second. So, but before I do, I've got one last question. Please, so therefore, prepare your questions. I'm going to get very angry if there aren't. You don't like it when you won't like it when I'm angry. So, I'm going to come to that in 1 second, sir. But Stephen, I want to end with you formally. There is a concept called Goodhart's law that says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Will ESG drive companies in Korea and globally to make improvements, or will optics supersede substance? In other words, this question of fad, is it a fad? ESGs.
I'm actually an auditor by background, so I'm very skeptical. Initially, there's no doubt that optics, that there will be a form over substance. Initially, But the absolute essence of ESG is about integrity, is about truthfulness, is about being equitable. It's about thinking about the world, the society, the next generation, doing good for the world, the people, the society, to our employees, to the environment. You cannot have ESG embedded in your culture, in your business, when you're lying and cheating and greenwashing and making these window dressing, spending $2 just to get this report that makes you look nice on the outside, but in substance it doesn't exist. That's not going to be sustainable going forward anyway. Investors are going to be looking, right? And then there will be regulators looking. And going forward, there will be auditors that will be auditing it as well. So that won't work, Stephen.
Fundamentally not a fad. Is this working? It's not a fad. It is it is good business, pure and simple. I'm just going to go to. We'll come back, but let's go to sir. Please, we have the most eminent question coming from the most eminent person in the room. The microphone is coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you very much, everybody, for making good presentation. I have one comment. I think AMCHAM, FKI, we share the same value and same target, which is to make Korea a better place to do business. But as you know, we have a lot of hurdles here, especially labor management issues, and then regulation issues, anti-business sentiment, and some of the anti-foreign business sentiment. So we should go hand in hand and to solve these issues together. And environmental issues, climate change, which we should solve. If not, we all diminish away. And then we should do everything we can to improve climate change issues. But Korea is not a good place to make wind power or solar power. And the other options are coal or water, gas, heavy oil. They are not good for carbon issues. Then the only option that we should have a very pro-environment source of energy is nuclear power. And then Korea has the most efficient, most safe way of making nuclear power issues. Then in that sense, your ESG committee of AMCHAM have any idea to give proposal to the government, to the society, that we should not wash away the nuclear power issues, because if they continue, our electricity will go up, and then there will be more carbon emission, and then the companies in Korea will lose a lot of money, and then they lose competitiveness. So I would like to ask members of ESG committee.
This is a fantastic first question, and we've only got 6 minutes to respond. But from the vice chairman of FKI, it's a right question too, because I mean the whole ESG. I think we all agree that it's fundamentally important for businesses. That's the clear message that's come out today. But it doesn't mean that there aren't big questions around labor, which you alluded to, and how do you make that transition in a way that's just, the just transition. It's a hugely important question and challenge. The question also about renewable energy in this country, with nuclear, what is the mix here? But I've got some ideas, but before I talk, perhaps Andrew, do you have any, as a representative of big industry here, do you have any comments on the question?
Actually, Stephen, on this one, I have to use my diplomatic skills and defer, because I think it's a very, very sensitive subject. I understand it's a very important subject for Korea. Especially on nuclear energy, because I mean, I think views are sort of at opposite ends of spectrum. On safety, I guess, is one of them. So I think from a company perspective, I fully understand and appreciate the electricity concern, but I really have to use my diplomatic skills and defer to you.
I understand. Well, I'm not going to. I don't have to have diplomatic skills, but I'm going to remain neutral on this one, in a sense. But I think it's something for the committee and the AMCHAM to start having to work, because all of your members are going to be confronted with these really important questions, and we're not going to be able to address them in the 4 remaining minutes we have. But it strikes me, though, on one of the things, hydrogen cell technology here is a huge opportunity. Electric vehicle transition, huge opportunity. So there are some really clear advantages that Korea has, I think, as an outside observer, where there should be a lot of focus. And by the way, a lot of job creation opportunities as well. Any other questions? One more question. Yes, sir, over there.
오늘 토론 너무 잘 들었습니다. 한국말로 해도 괜찮을까요? 저는 그 P&G의 말라카니아지 대표님께 좀 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 그 여성 최고위직이시잖아요. 근데 한국 같은 경우는 어느 직급 일정 넘어가면 이제 여성 임원이라든지 그런 고위직들이 잘 안 보이는 그런 경향이 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 저 한국에서 이제 경영을 하시다 보니까 P&G는 좀 이런 그런 이제 여성 고위직 육성을 위해서 이런 정책을 좀 하고 있고 이런 것들이 좀 확산이 되었으면 좋겠고 뭐 그런 좀 들려주고 싶은 말씀이 있으실지 좀 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Oh, so he's asking that there's not many high executive there's not many female high executives in Korean companies, and he wants to know if there is any strategy from the companies that they are working on to enhance on this issue.
So to Bilaka, that's a great question. Thank you. Bilaka, go ahead.
What is the representation of women and what are we doing to improve it? That's the question. So, I'm very proud to say that in Korea, our representation is 50-50, actually, men and women across all management levels and including administrative. Even at a senior management, which we call executive board, we have 7 women out of 15 executive board members. So even at leadership, we've been able to achieve gender equality. But I think, as some of my panelists also pointed out, that it's not enough to have just representation. So our key focus is how can we have inclusion, equity, and great opportunities for both men and women so that we have an engaged workforce. And the specific work that we are doing now in Korea and also in many other countries is, number one, to have a very, very strong program on involving men as allies. Number two, in hiring and development and retention, we have very specific programs for women across function, including women at STEM, women in sales, women in finance, so that we can identify what are the challenges in recruiting, hiring, and training, and we put women in the top crucible roles. Make sure there is a slate. Every time there is a promotion, there is a slate where women and men are considered. And third one is that having the right policies, which will allow flexibility at workplace, which respects the life stage changes that men and women both have. And increasingly, we are finding that it's not one policy that works for everyone. So being open for women and men to actually work out what works best for them and supporting them with very, very strong intentionality is, the third thing that we are working. Moreover, with all our, external stakeholders, like I said, suppliers, and with other, government partners, NGOs, we do a lot of share and reapply because, to be very humble, we may still have opportunities in several areas. So I hope I answered the question.
You have, and I think it's a very good way to end. Certainly, our experience in the New York Times is if you have leaders in your executive team, that also really helps drive. Our chief executive is female, our chief growth officer is female, our head of product is female, HR and counsel. So we actually have a majority of women in leadership positions at New York Times now. But I just want to quickly, how does that sound to you guys, men, who are leaders in your organizations, before we end? women in your leadership teams? How many are there holding you to account here?
I'll have to do a quick math. So overall, I think we're similar to P&G Korea in that overall population in the Seoul office, which we have about 160 people, we're about 50-50. We have a silicone site in Jincheon, but because it's a manufacturing site there, I think it tends to be more man-heavy. At the management or the executive level, we could probably do better, but I think we do better than a lot of the Korean companies. So out of what we consider top 2 tiers, we have 3 women on that out of, I guess, total of 11 people. So I think we're doing good. We could probably do better. So let me leave
You're
it
on
at
your
that.
way. Morgan Stanley, how are you as a financial institution doing in this area? And how do you assess companies? And we're going to end with you on this, actually. How do you assess companies in terms of diversity? How important is it?
So internally, we're a firm that really emphasizes diversity, and that's across race, sex, gender, and everything. So, for example, our head of research is actually, she's a lady and she's very competent. And within our representation, I'm not really too sure, but it should be close to 50%. Now, the way we look at companies in terms of governance, I mean, there are some, I think I had it in my presentation, but one of the key things we also look at is representation of women directors in the board. In the board. So right now, Korea is at around 5%, and I believe there is right now a rule that current companies have to increase that. So we're going to see some improvement on that end. The other thing also we kind of look at is the diversity of the composition of the board, meaning that not profession, also in terms of whether there's foreigners also in there. So we look at a lot of indices, a lot of indicators there. But I think what's probably most important for us when we look on a governance standpoint is that there's diversity is there, but I think more important is that when you look at the decision making is being done on an equitable standpoint, meaning that there's not just one key decision maker. There's a lot of people that's actually putting a lot of input into these decisions.
We're going to end there. Thank you very much, all the panelists. Jim on the screen. Jim, thank you. Stephen, June, Balaka, Andrew, thank you so much. And thank you, AMCHAM, for hosting this.
Ladies and gentlemen, this will be the end of the forum today. I would like to thank all the speakers and the presenters. Have a great day and stay safe.